Brought to you by APG Chesapeake. We'd like to give special thanks to our presenting sponsor, the University of Maryland Shore Regional Health. We'd also like to thank our supporting sponsors for helping with this production. Chesapeake Bay Live presents the Speaker Series, sponsored by Shore Regional Health. Today's Speaker Series features Katie Dilley of Midshore Behavioral Health. Today's topic is supporting mental health, access to help, and wellness for individuals facing substance use.
Hi, my name is Katie Dilley, and I'm the Executive Director at Midshore Behavioral Health. Midshore Behavioral Health is the core service agency that sits in Talbot County of the Eastern Shore of Maryland, but we actually represent all 5 counties of the Eastern Shore. We have the pleasure of serving as the core service agency overseeing our publicly funded behavioral health services that sit in each of the 5 counties. That might seem like a role that would be very much behind the scenes, but in fact, our priority is really being engaged and as involved as we possibly can with meeting the needs of our community members and our constituents. And during the month of September, as we honor and recognize both National Recovery Month, but also National Suicide Awareness Month, it is a perfect opportunity to reach across both sides of the spectrum to support one another and how we're ensuring access to and adequate delivery and quality care for those in need of services here in our community. One of the things that we are very sensitive to is that sitting in a rural environment, we have a lot of needs that aren't necessarily met as easily as they would be on the other side of the bridge or in a more metropolitan area. So the work that we do is to find innovative ways to bridge partners to be collaborating more effectively. For example, we have a major transportation limitation here in our region. So how can we look at doing some out-of-the-box access to services? So recently we've been doing a lot of work with advocating for the sustainment and the access to telehealth. So that's part of our work that we've been doing since COVID-19 has impacted our communities, is really looking at, in the face of a pandemic, how do we ensure that those that were already receiving services are still able to access those services. In addition to how do we bridge opportunities to make sure that we're reaching folks that are having new and emerging needs as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, because it goes without saying, this has been an extraordinarily stressful time for everyone. So we're seeing a lot of needs come out in our community that weren't necessarily as prevalent before, but have certainly reinforced the need for agencies like Midshore Behavioral Health to look at how we can try to get ahead of the curve of what we're anticipating with the impact of folks needing mental health and substance use services, and try to open up and open doors for services that may not necessarily have been available to the community historically before COVID. So the Going Purple movement has been something that I've had the pleasure of witnessing the evolution of over the last 4 years here in the Midshore region. Seeing Talbot County be, the emerging leader in bringing the movement to the Midshore region, and now what we've seen be a growing movement over the entire state of Maryland, which has been such an amazing and outstanding outcome of the initiative that really emerged here in our region out of Talbot County. Having a community prioritize using the month of September to unify, re-engage, and really recommit to being a part of changing and addressing these needs of several of our community members is just outstanding. And it begins with awareness and taking that step to commit yourself to being aware that there are needs, that people are struggling, that substance use is happening in our backyards, that mental health is happening in our families is extraordinary. And I think it helps with really working to break down the walls of stigma and helping our generations that we're bringing up, our young adults and our children and our youth that are getting involved in the Purple movement, and even our older adults that maybe weren't as tied into, oh yeah, that's happened in my family for so many years and we've just never talked about it. It's sort of a liberating and engaging time to come together and support one another. Like I said earlier, recommit to supporting each other as a community, bringing awareness, education, and reminding our partners of what resources are right here in our community, because there are several partners that are new, several that have changed their course of their services to adapt to the changing needs of our community. And it's my priority to make sure that folks know that there's help out there and readily available. I appreciate the opportunity to use September as a time to remind our community of what we have, and that having that availability is just part of it, but supporting access and understanding that it's okay to take the first step to get help and ask for help. It's just a wonderful reminder that we're here to bridge support and help, and that there really is a network out there that are ready and available to be there to walk alongside you on that journey.
My name's Chuckie Mooney. I'm from here. I'm from Easton. I'm a hometown boy. My clean date is March 7th, 2014. I have just over 6.5 years clean. I have been working in the contractor trade for about 5 years. I just recently switched positions to sales from working in the field. As any transition, there's been learning curves, but I decided to, life is always a game of leveling up and getting out of your comfort zone and moving on to the next position. So I decided to take a leap of faith and take a step that has a little bit of fear entailed in it, and move into a position I haven't necessarily been in before, to try to actually build a career rather than just having a 9-to-5 mediocre job. So I started using at a fairly early age. When I was a preteen, I think I was 11, I became ill and spent years back and forth to specialists in Baltimore, Johns Hopkins, University of Maryland, seeking a diagnosis. And in the meantime, I was basically given a small pharmacy of narcotics. I had opiates, I had benzos, I had amphetamines, and along with these drugs come fairly ill side effects. And at the time, the doctors told my parents that they couldn't condone it, but they may want to consider letting me smoke marijuana to combat the side effects of lack of appetite, insomnia, and all those things. And that's kind of where all this started off. Is, my dad was one of us. He was in active addiction most of my life, and there was already weed in the household. He just wasn't sharing it with us until the doctors made the statement that it could probably be helpful. So at the time, all I had to do was go to my dad and say, hey, I don't feel well. And he would be like, okay, here's some of this to try to make you feel better. And it got to the point, and really early on, I would manipulate that. I would take advantage of the situation because, my household was chaotic growing up. Dad was an active addict. We don't typically cope with things that well or treat the people around us that well. So my household was chaotic, and I didn't necessarily know how to cope. And when the illicit substance was introduced, I realized that the more that I used and the longer I stayed under the influence, the less that I had to feel. So I abused it. And, at a very early age, I had a dependency, whether it was physical or psychological, to an illicit substance. And over the years, that just progressed. The more drugs became available, the older I got. And every time something else became available, I had no fear. I've never really had fear of anything. So when something crossed my path, I wanted to know what it was like. And if it could further numb the things that I was most fearful of, which was the way that I felt and the lack of knowing how to cope with it, then that was the ticket. That was what I wanted. So over the years, it progressed, and along with the progression of the active addiction, the consequences progressed as well. My first inpatient treatment center was when I was 16 years old. I was at a juvenile inpatient treatment center for 2 months. But at the time, I was just, doing what country boys did on a Friday and a Saturday night. So you couldn't really tell me that anything was wrong with it. And then eventually, as things progressed, I ended up in 8 more treatment centers. My life was a revolving door of treatment centers and jails and probation officers. And by the end of it, I found myself in West Baltimore with a heroin and crack cocaine addiction. And looking back from the time that I was 11 or 12 and I was asking, my dad to give me weed to make me feel better from the side effects of the medication, you could have not told me at that time that I would have progressed from where I was to where I ended up. And where I ended up was no concern for my well-being, for anybody else's well-being. At the end of it, I was a menace to society. I've been in and out of jail so many times that, and it got to the point that my family, when I was in jail, was happy that I was there. Not because they didn't miss me, not because they didn't want me around, but because they were safe from my actions, because nobody was safe for me when I was using. And they knew that I was safe for myself as well. It gets to a point where the drugs stop working. And I don't necessarily mean that I stopped feeling the effects of them. I was still getting high. But everything that I did compounded the next thing that I did. And it got to the point where I started to feel the effects of the consequences. Like, there's having consequences like going to jail and going to rehabs is one thing, but having your mother look at you and say, I just want my son back. Or, your sister or niece saying, I just want my brother or uncle back. Like, those things hit really hard. And regardless of how many drugs I put in me at this point, it was clear that I wasn't going to die because my tolerance was huge. And it wasn't covered. It wasn't doing its job anymore. And I realized that I was tired. It's a full-time job plus some to be a using addict. I'm constantly having to come up with schemes. I'm constantly having to rob. I'm constantly having to steal, and I was tired. So I went to a treatment center on my own volition for the first time, and I completed it, which was the first time I completed an adult treatment center, and I legitimately did not want to use anymore. But when I left, I didn't have a plan. I went back to the same environment with no structure, and within a week, I was back to the old habits, the same things that I would do over and over. And within 24 days of using again, I found myself back in jail and homeless. And sometime between sitting in that jail cell and going back to treatment, basically going back to treatment the day after I got bailed out, I realized that my way doesn't work. I realized that I had to ask for help because I don't know how to do this. I really wanted to stop using, and I was using against my will, and I didn't know how to stay clean. So when I left treatment, I made a plan for aftercare. Mental health and addiction go hand in hand, for me anyway. I have to take care of both simultaneously. If I let one stray, then that's going to attack me. I mean, it sounds kind of crazy, but they're almost their own entity, right? Like, the disease of addiction talks to me in my own voice. So does the disease of mental health. So I had to do things like, get mental health assessments. I had to do things like go to intense outpatient programs. I had to do, the recovery house. Like, this isn't something everybody has to do, but I needed to restructure my entire life. And that's what I did. I fell in with a group of really good men who, Bruce being one of them, who were living a completely different lifestyle. And they helped me. They didn't tell me what I needed to do. They gave me footsteps to walk in, because I couldn't do this thing on my own. And I realized that if I wanted to stop feeling the consequences of my actions, I had to change my actions. I had to change my ideas. I had to change my thought patterns. Everything had to go, and I had to completely revamp my life from the foundation. The perseverance that comes from a recovering addict is nothing like I've ever seen before. If I was to look at somebody that was in my position 7 years ago, really the only thing that you can do for somebody who's still using it is give them a hug and tell them that you love them and that there's a different way and you're here to help them if they need it. You cannot beat it into somebody. You cannot pray over somebody and have them ready to come in. Like, it takes a certain level of willingness, and unfortunately for somebody to reach that level of willingness, it also takes a certain amount of pain. So I would just hug them and tell them that I love them and I know where they've been, and I also know the potential they have and where they can go. And that's really all I could do.
So one of the most challenging things about taking the first step, or even acknowledging that you may have a mental health or need to access services for substance use, is stigma. And stigma is something that impacts all of us. It can be that anxiety or the fear of someone knowing or understanding that you need help. And it's also looking at, our cultures, our families, our histories, what makes us who we are. Is this something that will be accepted in my house if I decide, you know what, today I'm gonna make a phone call and I'm gonna go talk to somebody that's not in my family about how I'm feeling. But that apprehension and that piece that gets in the way oftentimes is stigma. And stigma can be defined and originate from many different elements in someone's life. And a lot of times it's even the communities that we live in that might be stigmatizing access to help. Or someone may feel that because they're in a certain role in their job or a certain position on the football team or, a role in their church, that it would be uncomfortable if someone perhaps found out that they were getting help to address their mental health or substance use needs. That's what really, I think, Going Purple is so wonderful to highlight, is really trying to pull that stigma away from the community, take it out of that fear or that shame or that apprehension, to remove that stigma, break down the walls of it, to support people in realizing that it's part of your whole wellness. You can't have health without your mental health and your wellness. So if you're not addressing that, you're not taking care of yourself well. So really looking at how our community can support changing the lens of what behavioral health services, how they're looked at. And that stigma has been the challenge that I think all of us struggle with, trying to figure out what's the best way to get rid of it, to take it out of someone's world. And that can be difficult to define, but I do think that the Going Purple movement has been a wonderful way to take the next step to really help the community support breaking down the walls of stigma that could impact individuals getting help. So wellness in the pandemic has been something that we've been looking at, and all of us have been reading or seeing in the news, or just really witnessing in our own communities the impact, and trying to draw conclusions on how much has our community really been impacted by COVID-19, and the impact on our wellness as a whole, but mental health in particular, in addition to a crisis that we've already been managing for several years and facing and struggling with, I should say, our opioid crisis. So there have been a couple recent studies that have come out in real-time data that has recently been released as of August 13th from our Centers for Disease Control. About 41% of individuals that were surveyed acknowledged that they've had an experience of anxiety or severe or unmanageable anxiety since COVID-19 has started. About 31% of individuals acknowledge having depressed mood or feeling majorly depressed and really struggling with being able to be productive or engaged in their activities of daily living since COVID-19. About 14% indicated an increase in active substance use to a place that was more engaged in using substances than pre-COVID-19. The majority of the respondents to the survey that was done by the CDC, about 75% of the individuals that participated were between the ages of 18 and 24. One of the questions that was asked as a part of the survey was, have you contemplated harming yourself or thoughts of having the desire to end your life since COVID-19? So of that population group, about 26% indicated that they had contemplated suicide. That statistic alone, aside from the other data points indicating the increase in anxiety and depression, to me speaks to the work that we need to do to make sure that we're reaching and connecting with our young adult population to make sure that they know that there are available resources out there to help. In addition, working to address the stigma around how can we break down the barriers to make sure that that population is actually not just aware that there's help out there, but they're actually going out and seeking it or telling someone, you know, I've been feeling this way. I've had thoughts about hurting myself. I've had thoughts about not being here. This is too much for me to handle. These are all thoughts that could enter someone's mind, but at the same time, when you consider that someone has actually acknowledged that they have contemplated suicide since COVID-19, it's very concerning on so many levels, and I think should reinforce the need for our communities as well as our stakeholders on local government and state government to realize that we have to make sure that resources and access to care and funding and support for services is a priority. So the Midshore region is really strong in our ability to bridge services and, as I like to say, provide a warm handoff from provider to provider if you are already receiving services for whether mental health or family support or substance use. Our network of providers are very committed to supporting one another. And if they aren't able to meet a need, they're really quick to make sure that either our office at Midshore Behavioral Health is contacted or they reach out to the provider they know that might be able to meet the need of an individual in the community that could perhaps serve them better. But one thing that is difficult is when you don't know where to start, you don't know where to start. And that's one thing that I hope that we can, with this messaging and with continued messaging in our community, reinforce that even if you don't know where to start, there is a place to start. And so organizations like Midshore Behavioral Health are a resource for anyone living in the 5 Midshore counties to reach out to. We take help calls. We help folks navigate the system, talk through what are your needs? Where do you think you may want to go? Are you calling on behalf of yourself or your family member? And our office can be reached at 410-770-4801. But Midshore Behavioral Health, we're not technically a provider, but we're there to help. We're sort of a resource hub, and we do oversight around the provider network that does sit in the Midshore region. So I think in a case where someone at my office might not be able to help out, I would say the best place to start is reaching out to our Eastern Shore Operations Center. Our Eastern Shore Operations Center is identified primarily as a crisis hotline, but they're really a resource and referral line. And I would strongly encourage anyone that doesn't know where to start there. The Eastern Shore Operations Center can be reached at 888-408-8018. So the Eastern Shore Operations Center is the gateway, I like to say, to the network of resources that sit not just in the 5 counties of our Midshore, but actually all 9 counties of the Eastern Shore. So if you have someone that you're trying to support that happens to live in Wicomico County, that number will work. If you're trying to get someone connected in Cecil County, that number will work. And it's free, and it's 24 hours a day. It is staffed with a team of individuals that have clinical background. Some of them are clinical social workers, some of them are case managers. Some folks that work at the hotline are also individuals with lived experience, our peer support specialists. So it's a wonderful place to start if you just need to say, I feel like I need to get into treatment and I don't know where to go. That's also the number to call if you have an urgent need to get into treatment. So if you are thinking that yourself or a loved one or someone you care about needs to get access to an appointment within 2 to 3 days, call that number, because they will be able to set you up with an appointment to be seen within 2 to 3 days after making contact on the hotline by a clinician. In addition to the hotline support and resource referral, our Eastern Shore Operations Center also is the gateway to dispatching our mobile crisis teams that sit here on the Eastern Shore, which are also 24 hours a day. Those mobile crisis teams will come out to the home or wherever you are in need of services or crisis response. And crisis is really defined by the person. There is no guideline to say your crisis is not a crisis. Go over here and access services. That's not the case. If you feel that you need someone to come to your home and meet with you or meet with your child or your parent or your loved one or friend that's residing with you, they will do that. And like I said, it's a 24-hour access and they will respond. We have a couple of teams now on the Eastern Shore that also have clinicians and team members that are working primarily with our child and adolescent populations. So if it appears that you have a youth in your home that needs extra and more specialized response, you can contact the hotline and ask that you have someone who can come out to the house or wherever you are to help work with that youth. So that's also a newer but enhanced availability to that resource. Safe stations are sites that an individual can show up to, be greeted by a team member at the safe station to be addressed and asked how they're doing, assess whether or not they need crisis services. Are they ready to engage in treatment? Are they ready in the moment to leave the safe station site and go into a crisis bed, perhaps to start residential substance use treatment, or they just want to connect with someone because they're really struggling. So on the Eastern Shore, we have a safe station coalition, and that coalition is made up of locations of safe stations that are housed all the way down in Ocean City in Worcester County. We have one site in Wicomico County at the Recovery Resource Center there in Salisbury. And we have 2 safe stations that are housed in Talbot County, one at the Emergency Response Center located on Port Street, and also our St. Michael's Police Department is also a safe station. So those are locations that an individual can show up at any time of day. And if there isn't a live person ready to greet them and address what their needs are, there is a way to get connected with a peer to have phone support and then have mobile crisis respond if needed, to make sure that that person is navigated and supported to get help. We have 8 crisis beds that are available for anyone in need of crisis services for substance use treatment and opioid treatment at the AF Whitsitt Center, which is located in Chestertown, Maryland. Those crisis beds are also available in a 24/7 nature. In addition, they are not tied to any sort of insurance type. They are grant funded, so if an individual was ready to access a crisis bed, they could contact the crisis hotline or the AF Whitsitt Center and be admitted and not have to worry about how they're going to pay for it, which is essential. And that's a newer resource that's moved into our region in the last 3 or 4 years. So that's a very valuable resource to make sure folks are aware of. During the month of September, there's always the opportunity to define, what does this mean for us? What does Recovery Month mean to Maryland? What does acknowledging National Suicide Prevention Month mean to us? In the state of Maryland this year, Recovery Month, the hashtag around that is Recovery, Keep It Going. So one of the things that I would encourage everyone to do is to take a moment out of their day to ask yourself, what does recovery mean to me? And how can I be a part of keeping it going? So I would just encourage everyone to sign on to that messaging and take a moment to really think about how that applies to you, how that applies in your family, in your social networks, in your community, and how can you be a part of supporting keeping it going, as well as perhaps maybe this is the time that you step into making it part of your world and working on your own wellness and how you're keeping yourself engaged and taking care of all the stressors and impact that could be happening in your world. So recovery is not something either that I think we should limit to the month of September, or our awareness around suicide prevention. Those are both 2 very important and meaningful topics that I think outside of just this month of September, we should take that hashtag and apply it to keep it going in October, keep it going in November, keep it going beyond. So I encourage all of you to just use the month of September to initiate that thought process, really take an intentional moment out of your day to address, how am I doing? Am I really looking at myself? Am I meeting my own wellness needs? How could I do better tomorrow or even later today? There are choices that we can make in how we support ourselves and address our own wellness, our families, our friends. And right now, this is the time to do that more than ever. I think it's the COVID crisis has unfortunately impacted us with a lot of negative things. But if nothing else, it's reinforced how precious life is and how meaningful our time is, and trying to make it a healthy and well and enriched and supported time in our lives right now is the time to do that, the time to take a pause and really focus on how you can get to that place of wellness and support. So I encourage all of you to keep it going and think about recovery, think about mental health, and how you can be a part of the change and supporting your community in that. So an opportunity to keep the conversation going is coming up tomorrow evening. So out of Midshore Behavioral Health, we've been working to prioritize how we can bridge some of the gaps across the 5 counties when it comes to the movement that we're in right now with Going Purple. So a conversation that started a few months ago out of our office was, how can we look at partnering with each of our local health departments in each of the 5 counties to come together to go purple together. So for the last 2 months, we've been doing just that as a team, as a leadership team, trying to support our work that we're serving and how we're meeting the needs of the community. We've gathered to start that conversation internally with our own groups, but we're going to be promoting and available for that conversation in a really captivating, special sort of Midshore regional, first time ever event tomorrow from 4:30 to 6 p.m. It is an event that's hosted, it will be virtual, and it's through Midshore Behavioral Health, but it is representing each of our 5 counties, and our 5 local addiction authorities are participating in that event. And each county is going to be interpreting how they go purple in their county in a unique way. But it'll be an opportunity to experience that all together and see what each of the counties is doing. In addition to welcoming some great messages of hope and strength, we're also going to have some music and some art show materials from folks that are in recovery that are speaking about how they moved through their recovery and how they're on the other side and helping one another and their community members. Several peer support specialists, as well as community partners that are invested in being available and supporting access to help and community. So please make sure to tune in tomorrow, September 25th, from 4:30 to 6 p.m. For more information on tomorrow's Going Purple Together movement event, please reach out to Midshore Behavioral Health's Facebook page at Midshore Behavioral Health Inc. At Facebook, or you can look on our website and we will have a link there that you can be linked in to be able to view the virtual event, and our website is midshorebehavioralhealth.org. Well, thank you all for your time. This has been a wonderful opportunity to share and be a part of the conversation in the series of awareness and how we can support our communities and be stronger together.